Hello everybody, and thank you for joining this new webinar organized by the Establishment of Arabian for IT Service Management, the EAITSM. And this new webinar is on the subject of next generation IT operating models and IT4IT reference architecture. I'm sure many of you have already heard of the IT4IT architecture, which is from the open group, and probably you are interested in getting to know more about it. Please welcome with me Mr. Sukumar Daniel, our speaker today. He is the CEO and the Principal Architecture at the Action Research Foundation, and who has volunteered today to present to us this topic. He will be presenting from a philosophical and from a practical point of view. He will be also presenting, introducing himself in more detail in his presentation. So welcome, Sukumar. We are all listening to you now.
Thanks, Rania. Hello, everybody. It's really a pleasure for me to be participating in this very important and I think very future-oriented event. My name is, as Rania said, is Sukumar Daniel. I work out of Bangalore, India. Right now I'm in Colombo. My primary work has been over the last few years has been with putting IT for IT. What I mean is I've been working with large organizations like Tata Motors, Tesco Stores, ING Vysya Bank, and working very intimately with their teams and doing transformation. And what we're going to talk about today is going to be how things around the world are changing and how we need to also change the way we organize IT and how we can use the IT for IT reference model to make this happen in a comfortable and practical and systematic manner. The background, first we will discuss the background, and then I will be talking about what is happening in terms of the technology impact. As we all know, there's lots of new technologies like people wanting to become digital and so on. And this is going to impact the way IT organizations and businesses interact. After that, we'll have a look at what is a new paradigm and how things are going to move forward. As you can see here, very often when I'm talking to the business people, they find a little, that the IT really is kind of a follower and not a leader. And as you can see in this very beautiful illustration, what business needs now is going to be how IT can to really overcome the important stuff that is happening around us and to be able to face the future with a lot more courage and changes. One of the things that we really have to realize is that though there have been many different things that we have tried, many ways in which we have used many different models, many different tools, but somehow we seem to have still yet to make our customers happy and to make them really satisfied with what we're doing and to be future connected. Now, we know that there's a lot of technology disruption happening. We're talking about the digital age. We talk about bringing your own devices. We talk about cloud. We talk about SAS, and the service delivery models, etc., are really changing. And one of the key things that's very important to this whole change is how the relationship between business and IT is changing. Now we can see here, for instance, that there's a law of disruption. Today, the largest provider of hotel rooms doesn't own a single hotel room. The largest provider of car services doesn't own a single car. And the largest provider of retail the world over doesn't own a single store. And everybody understands that this is because of the way they're using information technology. So what we find is that businesses are really looking at this and saying, look, I need to get digital. I need to change the way IT is working. I can't wait for 6 months, 8 months for a new solution to be provided. I need the solution now. And we all know that's not a very easy thing to do in IT. Now, if you see this picture, you can see that there is a kind of a, I wouldn't say a struggle, but it seems to be that both are, very often people tell me that business and IT talk different languages. When somebody in business wants something, the IT people come and start talking hardware, this thing, that thing. And we also see, for instance, a very important move, that is the IT budgets themselves are shifting away from the CIO organization and into business. Now, that is quite a different way of operating. And we're going to see more and more of this, because it is no longer about just aligning IT and business, it's actually about the convergence of IT and business. And because of this, there is one thing that is happening which we can call as two-speed IT, or something called bimodal IT. And as you can see, Gartner has done quite a detailed study on this. Now, what is two-speed IT? Now, when we talk about speed one, it is your traditional IT. It is your financial accounting system. It is your inventory management system. It is your ERP type of a solution which actually runs your business. Now, that is not going to change. Maybe the way we manage it may change, but the core business processes and the core stuff that is happening in terms of information management systems is really going to stay there. Of course, so this means what? Then what really is changing? What changes is what is coming on top of this existing layer, which is where you find that, the digital divide, as they call it, of people using many things happening on your handhelds, on the phone. We even hear that Microsoft is going to discontinue Windows, and Windows 10 is probably the last version that's happening. That is because the devices...
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And what we really see is that the people who are, when we look at this two-speed IT, we can see that the core IT is going to be stable, and the stuff that comes on top, that is where the user interaction is taking place, is going to be different. Now that needs to change. That needs to change very rapidly, and that is where you're going to bring in other third-party solutions. You may not have the talent inside your organization to build these things, so you're going to go and look for specialists. But the core one, the speed one IT as we call it, is going to be there, while you have to learn how to manage the speed two. So this is going to be one of the biggest things that is happening, where the CIO organizations have to learn how to manage both of these. The speed one IT requires stability, requires what we call as CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? Whereas the speed to IT, while has to meet the security requirements, needs a lot of flexibility. So we are seeing movements like agile, movements like, which we will see a little bit later, how these things are working. Now, what this picture that I'm showing here is from a very interesting paper, where they are saying that if you look at it, the earlier versions of IT was, we're a technology provider to the business, and we're a troubleshooter. And the key thing we kept hearing was reduce costs. But now, what the business needs is, actually they're trying to say that IT should be like a magician who can come and say, look, how can we do this new thing? How can we engage our external customers with some new, especially the new millennium customer. Everybody wants it immediately. How do we make this happen? Now that we can see is really that when we're looking at traditional IT, we ran it like a mechanic shop mostly. We built products separately outside the system, then we got them into production, and we kept them running. Whereas the new IT paradigm that I think is required is for us to behave like a customization studio. We try to understand what the customer needs, and we look at the technologies that are available, and we say, how can we change things? How can we improve things? How can we make them happen? Now, this is not a very simple job. It's actually quite a complex story, because it's not only about changing of technologies, it's also about changing of the mentality itself. So, coming to the point, can we really make this happen? Obviously, we can't use the same methods or the same ideas that we used to create this situation that we have today. So what are the changes? So the need of the hour is really a new paradigm, a new way of thinking, a new way of being. What we really see about the existing methodologies or the traditional ways of organizing IT, because an operating model is about how the IT group as a whole works and engages with the business. We see that we have silos. Infrastructure is a silo, development is a silo, support is a silo, contact centers are silos, network support is another silo, and each one of them are having their own SLAs. So what it means that my server is running 99.9% of the time, my SLA is green, the application people are also reporting green, network is also reporting green, but the customers sometimes are screaming. What this means is that IT has been inward looking. IT looks from inside itself, inside its silos. Is my technology working fine? Then I'm doing a good job. If there is a problem, it is somebody else's problem. What we really need to shift to is to shift to this thing called a service-oriented view. Now what that means is that instead of focusing within our silos, we got to look from the outside. If you see, when we do the silo thing, we are not only organizing the IT CIO organization in silos, but even the outsourcing is done in silos. Now this makes it even more splintered. And what I call as rear view mirror driving. When we want to improve, we say problem management. We look at the things that are going wrong, continuously going wrong, or major things that are going wrong, and we try to fix them in a way that it won't occur again. Whereas, if you look at the front view driving, as I call it, then you're going to see out there and say, look, this is what my business needs. This is what the competition is doing. And how can I use this new technology that is coming? Is something bad? Or is it an advantage for me to go into this new way of doing things? So that means that when we talk about the silo-based model, it needs a mechanic shop attitude. And when we shift to the service-oriented model, we're talking about customization. We're talking about improved things. So last word I have to say on that, maybe some people may not agree, is that the silo-based IT model delivers various technologies and so-called supports to the business. Whereas when we look at the service-oriented IT operating model, it's the business itself. Look at Amazon. Look at, many of these new things that are happening around us. The business is the IT. So here you can see a very traditional legacy system. So you have the different silos, and I explained earlier. These silos are also outsourced. I have seen quite often in very large organizations, the CIO organization inside the enterprise has the silos, and they may retain a very large service provider, and the service provider also is in silos. Sometimes I've seen people sitting just a couple of desks away, but they don't talk to each other. They talk to the silo chief within the enterprise, and then there's some weird route by which the thing comes to the other person. And then there are problems because this is lack of communication, whereas a service-oriented approach works quite differently. So what is really the need of the hour? What we're really talking about is how do we move away from these kind of silo-based organization systems and go towards a next-generation operating model that is going to focus on services. Because when we focus on services, it means our people know what the business needs. For example, if you're in a telecom industry and you're going to look at for instance, right? So are we really looking at how much of the billing we're missing? How much delays are cost in billing? What is the revenue that actually impact happens to the business? Or for instance, again in the telecom industry, what is the time it takes for a person to say, I buy a new phone, and how quickly is the change impacted? Or when somebody goes to, there are so many such examples. So what we really need to do is how are we going to organize ourselves so that our people and the whole system is focused on the business. That is what we call as a service-oriented thing. Now here you see two pictures. The rear view mirror driving, they're always looking back, see how things went and how we can make the changes and make the improvements. Whereas the front view, we see all the advantages the new technologies can give us. We see where the business is headed. we see where the customers of business are headed, and we collaborate with the business in forming new solutions, in representing ourselves in different ways, in making our collaboration with the customers different. Now, if you look at these two models, what you see here is supply chain for Walmart, and on the right-hand side, you see the supply chain for Amazon. What is the difference? Walmart took 125 years to reach its level of prominence. Amazon has been there for 25 years. And look at the sizes and look at what they're managing to achieve. What really is the difference? Both are selling products, both are getting the products made, making them available to customers. I think the difference comes from the way they have taken what we call as the value stream or value chain and said, look, the customer doesn't have to go to a store. So I don't need to worry about a store. Instead, I will make my store virtual. Pick something from the value stream, and they took one particular value stream and improved it. Both still have to deal with various other things, but by looking at it from the value chain and saying which part of the value chain can I specialize in, which part of the value chain will allow me to beat my customer, they managed to change the world. Now we are coming up with how should IT organize itself. Now for this, fortunately, a lot of thinkers have put in various kinds of models. Now I'm showing you a model called the bio-operating model that stands for the broker, integrate, orchestrate model. People are now saying that IT should not own its own infrastructure, shouldn't manage itself. It should try to get these things from other people, because then it becomes quicker. So if I have to build a complete web-based app, or can I acquire a web-based app? Now in such a situation, this is what we call as a broker. The CIO organization operates as a broker. Now what does that mean? What we are beginning to see is that in the older days, the business would work out a big strategy and then throw it over the wall to IT, who will then say, oh, this is the business strategy and this is the IT strategy. Now we are seeing this change happening where people are beginning to say, no, the business strategy and the IT strategy are one and the same. And both the parties have to work together to make sure that the business strategy is supported completely by the IT, and the future for the business is a combination of these two. Now, when you go and buy things that are going to come on top or your two-speed IT kind of a thing, you still have the problem of integrating this with the existing level 1, speed 1 IT, which is your traditional IT. So that becomes a second biggest job for the organization, for the CIO organization. This is to ensure that the business can go out there and buy what they need and take the newest technologies, bring the time to market really low. For instance, you see the ServiceNow and other people are able to give you implementation cycles for a complete marketing solution of 2 weeks. No, if we have to build it, it would take us 2 years. So, but when we buy these things, we need to integrate them into the thing. Now, the third aspect of orchestration is that if there are going to be these multiple vendors, people that we don't really own, equipment that we don't really own, salaries we don't control, then there is a need for orchestration of different vendors with all the multiple speeds, the interfaces. So when we're looking at the next generation IT operating model, what we're saying is a CIO is a technical organization, is going to be a technical specialist organization. What does it do? It understands the business, it scans the technologies that are forming and becoming available, and then it integrates it, right? So this gives the required speed. This gives the flexibility. This provides the business with the ability to compete. Now, if we look at it, it's really a new way of thinking and being. For somebody who had his own house and who everybody was hired, the salaries were, paid, the performance was done, performance assessment was done by the CIO organization. Now, if you look at it from being a broker, in some ways that could be thought as a loss of control, but it really means a different way of thinking, a different way of thinking, a different way of being. We are also beginning to find, for instance, even the speed 1 IT like SAP, ERPs are now becoming available in that SaaS mode. So this is both a challenge, but as well as a huge opportunity for the CIO organization, because they no longer have to say, look, I don't have the talent to be able to do this. First I have to go and get the talent, then I have to do it, then I have to study, then I have to do this and that's going to take time. Now, instead, the CIO organization can go and evaluate, okay, here is the technology, here is an organization that is providing it. How do I use it integrated with my rest of my business? Does it give the business what they want? And then sit in the middle, integrate and orchestrate. So really, when we look at the next generation operating model, we are going to see this happen more and more. Now, this picture illustrates it. You can see on the left-hand side, the CIO organization has a lot of responsibility, right? They have to do the day-to-day management. They have to run everything as it is. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see, for example, how the CIO organization scope becomes a little smaller, right? This means you have to systematically give away things, which you can then, what we call as have a service owner, right? A service owner, instead of sitting inside the CIO organization, is now a third-party organization. It becomes their responsibility to ensure that the services provided by all the service provider components are going to be assembled and then provided to the business directly. So this is where we see the change happening. So in order to fulfill the strategic responsibilities, you can't be doing both. So which is where you're going to take the entire model is about how can the CIO organization, bring in services rapidly, make sure that there's quality of service, make sure there is reliability of service. And we are really beginning to see this happen more and more in the business space. Right? So the third-party component providers, so we can then say that there are two kinds of things, a service owner organization and a component service provider. So the assembly of the service, the ownership of the entire service is based outside the CIO organization. Now, how does IT4IT help us in this story? Which is, I think, where we've all been waiting to hear. And what is IT4IT? There is a lot of confusion because, there has been things like ITIL, for instance, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. There has been COBIT, there is ISO 20000. There are large tool sets like BMC, ServiceNow, CA, monitoring from many different companies. Now, all these things, have really brought us where we are. But have they really met their purpose? When we go and do, say, an ITIL, what they call as an ITIL compliance, though I don't know how anybody can be compliant to a library, do we really see the results of this? Does the customer see the results of it? Right? We may say, yeah, it does help us in the processes, but what is the end result when we look at it from the customer viewpoint? This is where we have to start looking at what is service orientation. Now, the illustration I'm showing you comes from a white paper from the IT4IT, where for the first time, from what all my readings have been, there is a definition of what is a service. A service is made up, they say, of three parts: the interaction part, the offer part, and the IT service system. Now, how to understand this? Look at a restaurant. Supposing you go for having dinner. Where do you go and sit? You sit in a restaurant. There are tables there. Somebody welcomes you and makes them sit. Now, that is called the interaction space, right? So if there was that interaction space gives a comfort to the customer, provides the necessary information. Now, what is the offer that is made? That is the menu card. Now, can you imagine going to a restaurant where there's no menu card? Now, what will they buy? What will they cook? What will they eat? So if you look at it, all services are made up of these three parts. There is the interaction part, there is the offer part, and there is the system. In the restaurant example, the system is the kitchen, the purchasing, the raw material stores, purchasing of meat, vegetables, or whatever it is, right? So when we look at it, we can say that there are two types of services. One is a business services, which is providing services to employees and to customers or employees. And then we see the IT service is an enabler to the business service. So when we are looking at it, it's not just the technology, because technology is sitting inside the IT service system. What we really want is to have a service system that is providing what we call as a service. So we don't say, I'm supporting Microsoft Outlook. Instead, we say, I'm providing email business communication, right? Now that means it can be through Outlook, it could be a web-based solution, or you could just go to Google and buy a corporate thing, as I've seen happen in many cases, right? So when we see it from a service, we really don't care about, not that we don't care, but we really are not focused on the actual product that delivers the service, because that is part of the service system. Even if it changes, then the service still stays the same. Let me use another example. You take financial accounting. Balance sheet is a service. Now I can use many different types of applications or even Excel sheet to prepare a balance sheet, right? But the service is a balance sheet. That is never going to change. So one of the things that when we talk about the next generation operating model is this focus on service. Now, if you look at it, you see how the businesses work. That is the blue, right? So there is a supply chain concept, or what we call as inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and service. Now what IT4IT is saying is that the same value chains that the business uses is what IT can use also, right? And what we will understand and learn is that the IT function, the approach of a value stream or a value chain concept is what is really a big differentiator between IT4IT and the others. Also, the other big differentiator, which I must say, is I'm not aware how many of you have been into enterprise architecture and so on. Some of you who are there will understand what is called as a reference architecture. ITIL, for example, is a library, and it has its purpose. It's a very good book. There are lots of very important information there, but it's not a reference library, reference architecture, right? So again, when we see this reference architecture in IT4IT, you will see a flat diagram. Now that doesn't mean that all activities have to take place in one organization. So the CIO, for instance, once you talk about multi-sourced environment, see the illustration on the right. It's like a motherboard, right? The top layer is where the business interaction takes place, and then any one of the services, any one of the parts of the services or the enablers of the services can be done by any multi-sourced environment. So you may have, for example, one vendor providing the data center support, another vendor providing network support, another vendor providing your application support, or more than one vendor providing an application support which results in one service to the customer, and so on. So what we really need to be able to understand is like how in these multiple layers that we have, what are the roles, what are the responsibilities, how are we going to orchestrate it? And then if you bring in an SAS product into it, the situation becomes a little more complex as well. Which is where the good news is, because with IT4IT, we can then say, oh, this component is with so-and-so, or this part of the responsibility is with XYZ organization, this part of the responsibility, and we can map the whole service from an end-to-end basis in its supply chain, in its value chain, and see how we can add value in each of that. The key to this IT4IT is what we call as a service model. Now here you can see that there are in the service model, you have the value chain, right? A value chain is made up of links. So in the IT4IT, there are 4 value streams. Value streams are part of the value chain. So the first one is strategy to portfolio. The second one is requirement to deploy, request to fulfill, and detect to correct. But what connects these value chains? So what they're really saying is that when you work with a business in the strategy to portfolio area, you create a conceptual service model. It's what I want to do, when will I do it, who will do it, when will it be released, will I build it, will I buy it? These are the decisions, and the conceptual service model then is converted to what they're calling as a logical service model. These are slightly new terminologies, but fundamentally the conceptual service model could be compared to what we used to call as a requirements document, right? Only in this case, it is a little bit more than a requirements document, because it is done with the business part of you, and both the business and the IT together create this conceptual model. Now the conceptual model gets converted to a logical service model, what we used to call as development. Now I know everybody's saying, haha, these are new words for the same old thing. But as we go in, we'll see how these things are linked, how we are doing it now, and how we could do it in a better way. So the logical service model is where the actual product is developed or it is purchased and all the definitions done about how it is going to come out to production. Now there what happens is that we come across a request to fulfill, which I think is a focus area which is relatively new, and that is one of the big aspects of the models that are going to come. What we call the next generation operating model is all about how do we make the services accessible to our customers, how do we automate this access, how do we provide self-help, and so on. And the final value stream is the detect to correct. Now in the detect to correct, we are looking at the realized service model, and the thing is we need a traceability between the realized service model and the conceptual model. So if you see the circle diagram which is showing, it's not just one linear flow from the left to the right, but it is a continuous interaction. It is, when I'm doing my conceptual service model and I'm going to my requirement to deploy feeds back into the conceptual model. Same way, there is an interaction both ways, and it's not to be thought that this is a very one-way kind of a thing. So here we have this picture. This is the picture of IT4IT. What you see on the top, the blue lines, the dark blue lines are called the value streams, and then you have the reference architecture in the middle, and you have the support activities. In IT4IT, we have defined the value streams. There's work still going on some of it. As you know, it's a very new model. So they have released certain levels of it, and continuously people are working to improve it, and you will see mostly that all the definitions are stopping at the reference architecture part of it, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the things are not important. So first of all, when you talk about the strategy to portfolio, it is quite different from, as I explained earlier, that somebody sets up a strategy and throws it over. So this is more about ecosystem innovation. This is about how the business is appearing, what are the new technologies that we're doing, and so on. So here we create the conceptual model. Now when we come down to the requirement to deploy, what we find is traditionally there is a big separation between the development teams and the production teams, or what we can call as the people who actually run it, right? And those of you who are familiar with ITIL know that everything happens in production. Whatever you know, that the values that are going to be realized are only going to be there. But this problem has been traditionally that the development people do something, they do this UAT, and then people start using it, and then all kinds of things come out of it, right? Things start breaking when you change, and then somebody says the requirements are not enough, etc. So what methods that they're talking about now is not that, okay, here is the strategy, go and give me $1 million and I'll go and do the strategy, but they're talking about working with the business, using incubating, prototyping, and new methods of developing where the development team and the support team are together. We will see interesting stories around this, and of course, Twospeed IT. Then comes the actual request to fulfill story. Now the request to fulfill story is very important, and this has been for quite some time. People call it service catalog management, but the service catalog management seems to be also a kind of a thing which we really many different views on it exist, and so on and so forth. And for the first time we see some real serious stuff in this area. Now it talks about service outsourcing. Where do I get it? Do I have to make it? Do I have to buy it? What are my security parameters? All this stuff is organized here. And finally, we go out to making it work in the detect to correct stream. And there we check what is happening and we feedback. Now the value chains and value streams, right? Value streams are ordered activities. It's just a question of getting your terminology right here. We have to understand now different ways of working. So when you're talking about IT4IT, you must have a very good clarity about what is the value chain and what is the value stream, right? So you see all the four, the plan, build, deliver, run is the value chain, and within that you have the value stream. So if you look at this picture, right, we've already seen the little picture on top. Let's keep that in mind, that we are going to be looking at the conceptual model, the logical model, and the realized model. So we will go through each one of this a little bit in detail. Since this is a short kind of introductory session, I will be able to give you an overview. There are programs where you can attend and learn more details. So the IT value chain offers you a blueprint that connects the whole thing. It is not, each one is not working in its own silo, but we want to look at how we can organize it. One of the things that happens, I was in the conference in London where I presented a paper on my work and using IT4IT and the people capability models using SIFIA, Skills Framework for the Information Age. We did quite a good job on it, where we were able to really identify what should be the capabilities required in a function, how do you go about putting it, and so on. And for me, it was great pleasure to present this paper. But in London, I also had this great opportunity to listen to people, right? One of the things that they said was that IT is finally able to talk sense to business, right? Because every time when I talk to businessmen, they say, whenever I talk to some IT person, he's always talking Greek and Latin, right? It's as if it's another language, it's something else. But by taking the value chain approach, the business people know value chains. And when you talk about value chain and say, this is how we are working, there seems to be one of the major benefits for IT4IT, as I see it, and something that I keep hearing time and again, is that it makes it much easier to talk to business. Where are we? What are we doing? How are we doing things? And here's a very important picture. The most important thing about the current stage of the IT4IT that we have to understand is that IT4IT is working, is the normative standard. What does that mean? I mean, all these words, I'll try to use simple words. Normative standards, it means what I have specified basically, right? You see that they specify something called a functional component, right? And you'll see later that the definition of a functional component is the smallest piece of technology, or rather, what information will be captured in each of these. Now, what is a capability discipline? Now, that is where things like ITIL, COBIT, your own ways of doing things, your policies, right? So therefore, if you look at this whole picture, what you see is that there is a normative standard, which is a big difference from other models. It's an architecture which says exactly what should be the minimum data that you should collect in each of these functions. But the capability discipline of how you will collect, what will be the process, what will be your policies, what will be the way you control those things, that is not done in IT4IT, right? There, you have guidance, you have complementary papers. What this allows you to do is to take the reference architecture and to make sure that the core stuff is met, and your capability discipline can be suitable for the business, for the industry, for different types of organizations, because bank to bank, while they're doing the same thing, they give money and they take money and they give it back to you. But the way the banks work is different, right? So that is called the capability discipline. Now this is what makes a reference architecture very powerful, because it tells you what you need to do from a technical viewpoint, and then it allows you to do the capability discipline and for meeting various scenarios that may be specific to your organization. Now this picture, this is what is showing you what we call as the function components. So you can see the strategy to portfolio has got 5 function components. Now you see a line down below, purple in color, right? This functional components has got 3 colors, black, purple, and gray, and you can see the relationships between them. They have drawn this in such a way that you don't need to be an architect to understand this, right? So in each one of these functional components, they have said what needs to be done, right? So, but the purple one is a very, is also a functional component. The circles are called data elements. Now, these purple elements are very special because they are the ones that actually manage the life cycle. So they're called lifecycle data components, right? So when you look at it, this is the thing that moves from value stream to value stream to value stream. The end result of the activity inside a value stream is condensed into these. So you have the conceptual service, that is where you're saying why, what is the business strategy, what actually we want to do, when do we want to do, etc. Goes to the conceptual blueprint. Now this is used by the requirement to deploy to realize the logical service blueprint, and then create a service release and a service release blueprint. Now this is handed over to what we traditionally call as the support, who then make it available, who release it, and then manage the correction, the detect to correct. That's where you're doing your incident, problem, and things like that. Now, the functional components are the smallest, what I said stands earlier. Now, what basically is the role of IT4IT and what is the standardization story? Now, I don't know in your organizations how many different applications are running in your organizations. For instance, somebody may be using Remedy as a ticketing system, and then you may use some other tool for monitoring servers, something else to monitor applications. Some other teams are using something else. You may be, your vendors, the service providers will use some other tool. So there is no way in which these things can get connected. So by using IT4IT, it is hoped that eventually we will be able to create a common bus or a common rule set that can help these different products to talk to each other. Right? So the functional, as I explained to you earlier, all the functional components come into this service model. And these are the core ones in the purple that actually move from value stream to value stream and carry the service through and provide a traceability from what is the business requirement to what is actually running in the service. Right? So let's have a quick look at what we are talking about, the strategy to portfolio stream. It drives here. What happens really is that you take the strategy and then you convert it into a service portfolio. You're able to manage demand, where you can analyze, prioritize, etc. And then you decide, okay, this is what we are going to be moving forward with. Now, you can see that there is an architecture, enterprise architecture component, policy component, proposal component, portfolio demand, and service component. Right? For those of you from IT background, you know what is a portfolio. But basically here what we are doing is we're able to manage the demand and how we are going to progress. Right? For instance, the buy or make decision, SAS, cloud, etc. is taken here. Then that brings us to the requirement to deploy. Right? This is where we're either building or we're sourcing. Now when we build, we go through traditional waterfalls, right? But the thing is that this waterfall thing has never really worked. It is time to market, flexibility, all these things if we need to look at different models. And that is where IT4IT really helps with us, right? Because it helps you to use your DevOps, Scrum, or waterfall, whichever model you're using. It helps you to do that. So plan, design, develop, test, and deploy are the stuff that happens there. So here we have project management, requirements management, service design. Service design is a very important aspect. Release. These are quite traditional terms, but the trick is when you look at it from the viewpoint of, say, DevOps or agile processes, right? As you can see, there is, in fact, sometimes I find it really funny that people have something like retail stores have Christmas freeze. What does it mean? No changes are allowed. When changes are not done, everything works properly, right? Now look at this picture. Amazon's deployment frequency is 20,000 and the lead time is only minutes, right? Google is doing 5,000, Netflix 300, Facebook every day. Now, how often do you make changes, right? In a typical organization, when they look at it, they say emergency changes and so on, and everybody is worried every time a change happens. The modern methods, actually, there is a very good white paper in the IT4IT forum. Each of you, I urge you to go to the open group. You can become a member without, if your company is a member, then you can access certain documents. But as an individual, you can still become a member, and you can even download the IT4IT standard. There's a lot of white papers out there, and I don't have the time to cover this whole story, but just remember that these kind of changes, this kind of flexibility is possible, right, through automation and DevOps continuous release cycle, right? And that brings us to the request to fulfill. Now this is, as I told you earlier, is quite a new way of doing things. Now here what happens is that it becomes very important to have a customer interface portal, right? Basically we're all quite used to having contact centers, but the point is that when we talk about doing more for less, today's IT customers are much more capable of doing things for themselves. So there is an offer consumption component, service, like shopping cart. You put up a proper portal, and I think many of you would have, when you use LinkedIn, for instance, you can't really call somebody, right? But you go there and you deal with a portal. Same thing with Amazon, right? So what they're really saying is that if you can make this offer consumption thing, now, for example, here would be, the self-service portal, as they call it, because when you have a self-service portal, you can then break up things. So supposing a new employee is joining, you need to do 15 things. You just say new employee, and the rest of it is done through automation, and you reduce the amount of IT people involvement. So therefore, the IT people can actually work on how to improve the service and so on. And you can see this very interesting startling, because when I was doing work 15, 20 years ago, everybody said, no, people like to talk to people, right? And here you can see the statistics are really pointing other way. And finally, we come to detect to correct. Now, typically what we do in detect to correct is where we are monitoring. Everybody knows proactive monitoring. Before something breaks, before the customer calls you, you want to be able to say, hey, this is happening, and if possible, limit unplanned failures and so on. But what we end up doing is, again, as I told you right at the beginning, we are looking from within IT, right? So we say, oh, this server is not working, or this server is down. We have these monitoring systems. We put people in front of these monitors. In fact, some place I went and asked, what is monitoring? They're all sitting in front of a monitor, right? But that's not it. What we really want to be able to do is to see a potential issue coming and to be able to stop it. Now, number two thing is, again, when I say IT is looking within itself, does it mean if your server is running, your customer is still able to use the service? So we need to do outside-in monitoring. And so here the thing is it's called service monitoring. It's not technology monitoring, right? So when you can do that, you see there are many, many different things, possibilities are there. So for instance, there are new tools which are talking about customer experience monitoring, right? You can see in real time how each of your customer's web page is working and how these things actually these kind of tools. There are some tools, for instance, which can even go down into your, say Citrix, for instance, the big issues in many sites, right? When you have this, they put a kind of agent in the front end, and that agent can send a synthetic transaction right through your system and come back and tell you, hey, this problem is happening in this location, right? So our monitoring has to change. It can just monitoring the servers based on what we call a static, issues like, my processor is 90% used and so on, is no longer going to be sufficient, right? You need to be able to know in real time how your customer's experience is, because if, for instance, if your customer is going to your enterprise's web page and it doesn't work, he just goes somewhere else and buy something, right? So it's becoming more and more important to know what is the customer's experience, and for you to be able to really see what is the part of your infrastructure, regardless of where it is sourced from, how is it working, and end-to-end view. So these are the various things. So if we tie it all together, we see that there's a strategy to portfolio from which you're coming into the requirement to deploy. And in the requirement to deploy, in the strategy to portfolio, you decide buy or make. In the requirement to deploy, you say, if I buy it, this is what I'm going to do. If I make it, this is what I'm going to do. And you create the service release blueprint, hand it over to the request to fulfill people who are going to be looking at, how do I put it out into my catalog? How do I automate it? And finally, we come to the detect to correct. So when we look at a summary, we see that the big difference in IT4IT is that you're talking about value-added services, right? You're looking at each of the value streams and saying, how can I add value? How can I make business more, more agile, right? And how do I make the multi-sourced service economy work? How do I get end-to-end transparency? How do I know who is doing what? How well are they doing? How can they improve my business? And you create an efficient and streamlined IT service. Now, for making all this happen, you can see over here, each of you could be quite involved with this thing, is that there is an IT management gap that is happening. And this gap is increasing, right? IT4IT programs were released last April, and you could attend training programs. We conduct them. You could, read them yourself, because the open group is all about being open. There are many ways, but I urge you to start considering what is the next generation operating model and how you will be able to move your organization in a staged manner across this. So if any of you have got any questions or anything that you'd like to ask, now is the time to do so. And I would like to thank you very much for the time, and thank you very much for the patience. And if you're not attending this webinar and you're going to see it some other time, you're most welcome to send email-based queries to us. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Okay, thank you, Sukumar. It's very nice, and I think I felt your enthusiasm about this topic. I feel you are so passionate about the subject of IT4IT and this new model. So if I can summarize what I understood, I see that it's like dealing with that IT organization as a service provider by itself. It's like separation of the logical layer of service management from the technology layer of the service management. So and I see that you made the service life cycle in the form of a value chain. So you have four phases of the service life cycle, and you see these phases as a value delivery chain. Yes, these phases. And I see each of these phases are somehow can be mapped to what we know in IT service management, either in ITIL or in ISO 20K. They can be mapped in a way or another. Not direct mapping, but I see this is a reference architecture, so it's just like a blueprint. So implementation also may need details from the service management literature in terms of processes, in terms of actual implementation steps. And in your model, the new model, the next generation model you are proposing, do you think, and also in the IT4IT architecture, do you think the cloud computing and virtualization will make it easier or make more sense in adopting this new thinking in implementing this new model? Because if we are talking about separation of technology details from the service offering, from the presentation of the service to the customer, to the business customer, for example, in the service catalog. So this separation is typical for cloud use, for cloud services use. So do you think IT organizations are encouraged to seek cloud-based technologies to make it easy for them to plug and play any module, any technology implementation details?
Yes, actually, there are two aspects when we talk about cloud. We got to be a little careful about what we are saying. One is, of course, what we call software as a service, where you buy the service completely in its totality and you pay by use. I see that happening more and more because then the CIO organization is free to say, okay, now we'll use this part of it, and we see a lot of organizations going for that, because the key thing that IT has always been struggling with has been time to market, right? If I take a requirement and build a product and test it and then roll it out and then improve it, instead I can buy a service as a whole. I know exactly what I'm going to get, and I'm also getting best practices along with it. The other aspect of cloud is actually the infrastructure side. Which I see happening probably more rapidly than the adoption of software as a service. The infrastructure side also, it has a huge benefit because of what is so-called plasticity, right? I don't have to worry about buying a very big server, even if I start with 10 users, I start with lesser space, and as my user base grows, or suddenly I have peaks, I have troughs, these things are very well managed and almost automated, right? And there used to be problems with security and stuff like that, but today people realize that the cloud service providers can provide better security at a lower cost than we can afford it. So yeah, I do see a big move, and I think these are some of the reasons why operating model, the way we manage things, has to change.
Yes, so mainly we can say that infrastructure as a service or platform as a service are more fitting for this model than software as a service.
No, that's not what I said. I'm saying that in the world today, both these models are very much part of this, right? Because when you're talking about the strategy to portfolio, there you're making a decision to buy a service or to create a service.
Okay.
Right? Both these are very well dealt with. What I'm saying is that the adoption of infrastructure as a service is probably going to be more rapid than software as a service.
Yes. Okay. So if anybody of the audience has any question, please post it and we can take your question. Now we have just 3 minutes remaining, but we can take any question if you have. Sukumar, I want to tell you that I'm proud. We organized this valuable webinar. It's full of content, and it's a very good of you that you were able to summarize many points in just a few slides. So it's a very good presentation. Okay, if nobody of the attendees has any questions, we can close now, and you can follow up later with us or with Sukumar directly. If you have any questions, you may send to us and we will pass to Sukumar, or you can contact him directly. So thank you again, everybody, for your attendance, and please stay tuned for future events. We have our annual conference coming in October, and we are organizing other events as well. So just keep following our activities. Thank you, Sukumar, once again, and I wish to see you in our future events also.
Thanks very much, Rania, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it, and I hope people find value in the presentation. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.